My name is Dmitry Markolov, aka at Dmitry Make Love, and you're listening to an episode of Faucets of Reality. Let's begin. Tyler, how do you pronounce your last name?
Derouin.
Derouin. Tyler Derouin.
You got it. Yeah.
Pleasure to talk with you today. So can you just talk a little bit on what it is that, what is your title, so to speak? What is it? What is it that you do?
Sure. Yeah. And just thank you so much for letting me have this time with you and to be able to speak about this and share about all the things that I'm up to and these sacred medicines, which are so important, I think, for humanity to come into a greater remembrance of who and what we are and a greater stewardship of ourselves, community, and the earth. Yeah, so I would describe myself as a facilitator of Bufo ceremonies and other entheogenic ceremonies or psychedelic ceremonies. So I'm working primarily with the toad medicine Bufo, which contains a very strong molecule, 5-MeO-DMT, and I'm also working with psilocybin, mushrooms, of course, rape, which is a tobacco snuff, and sananga, which is these very intense eye drops that really can help open up deeper visionary states when it's used in conjunction with other more visionary psychedelics.
Wow. You're already blowing my mind. This is amazing. Is that the honey I've been hearing about that you put in your eyes or something like that?
It's not necessarily honey. It comes from this South American plant, and it creates a really intense stinging sensation. Certainly honey, like you can infuse honey with like psilocybin. Like if you just like put a bunch of psilocybin mushrooms into some honey and let it hang for a while, it'll then the psilocybin will absorb into the rest of the honey, and that's kind of blue honey, which is incredible. And it's thought that folks would way back in the day when they didn't have good ways of preserving mushrooms, they'd actually put them in honey and then be able to travel great distances in order to bring mushrooms to other places without the mushrooms becoming moldy or something.
God, it's a preservative honey, right, in a way. Yeah, I've heard of that before. I've heard of it. I don't know too much about it. So you had mentioned, so you facilitate experiences for people, or you facilitate a sort of healing through these psychedelic plant medicines?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to approach it, and people are coming with different intentions, right? So most often, and I guess what's most popular now is to help people move through density or maybe move through challenges that they're having in order to find some sort of either to find a resolution through these ceremonies. And so something that's distinct about the way that I'm working with these medicines is I do it more in a ceremonial container opposed to a psychedelic assisted therapy container. So let's say in a like Bufo is a really good example because it is such a high intensity medicine and it comes on so quickly and someone's awareness is absorbed into that experience fully. Talk therapy just wouldn't make sense because someone's they're not in a verbal state and they're really allowing energy to move through them, and it's like an unlocking of stagnant energies that are in the nervous system. And once our ego filter kind of reduces enough to let those things that we're usually kind of keeping on the wraps and keeping down low, or things that are just maybe too painful to really hold in our like everyday awareness, those things can finally come up and be experienced and released in a deeply cathartic way. So oftentimes there's like presentations of if there's fight and flight responses in our lives that are interrupted, that gets like held in the nervous system. Let's say we almost get hit by a car, right? We're walking down the street, we almost get hit by a car all day. Like you might have a little bit of like tension or something in your body. Right. And it isn't until maybe later that you're able to like really like shake it out or do something like for yourself, like self-care for yourself or something of that
degree. You take a bath or something.
Yeah, exactly. That then you can really more fully relax. But usually when those fight or flight responses are kind of stopped midway and you don't find a resolution, these get stored in the body, in the nervous system, and then those can become patterns of tension. And if it builds up over time, they become chronic patterns, whether that's manifesting physically as holding in the body, maybe even as disease, or like chronic pain, or emotionally, you might have anxiety or depression or other, and then that can amplify too to like negative thought forms, like negative beliefs or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
That is so good. Yeah, it's really good to just kind of understand that. Yeah, I guess I would just want to say, our body is such a miraculous thing. It really does so much for us, and a lot of most of it we're not even conscious of all the work that our body is doing. Something really to tune into. So you said that these plant medicines, they help people work through. You had said a word, density. So what do you mean by that exactly?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so I think of I like to describe what we carry as like psychic wounds as existing both physically and mentally and spiritually, right? And so if we're thinking of, so most people are thinking of trauma as something that's like living in our psyche. So let's say you experience something tough as a child, maybe like parent that was like abusive. Let's just go with that extreme, yeah.
Okay.
So this is existing in the psyche as like our body's going to make patterns around that in order to help like accommodate or like move through the world in a way that makes sense, given that pattern in history is there. So we're trying to find defenses around those wounds, those psychic wounds.
Wow.
But when we're in these entheogenic states, these oftentimes can be experienced very physically. So people oftentimes, like with ayahuasca, for example, talk about the purge of like people vomiting, or that can come out as well as like shaking or getting very hot, get very cold, vocalization. And oftentimes this is a very physical experience. So when people are having that purge come up, there's a huge emotional quality to it. Even if there's not necessarily content associated, even if you're not thinking about those that history with a parent or something, you might just have a huge sense of gratitude after that purge happens. There's like a deep sense of relief and like emotional catharsis, and oftentimes a more of like a blissful feeling of like resolution on the other side of that.
Right.
And so the reason I use the word density is because this wound is existing both in the body, in the nervous system, in emotions, in like the mind and psyche, as well as like spiritually, because we're multidimensional beings. And so
multidimensional beings, love that. Yep.
And so it's one dense pattern is existing in all of those planes. And it might exist more so in one plane than another, but we all have access to it, and it manifests in all of those. In the same way that healing on one level, a massage, can help release emotions and can just give you more clarity.
Yeah, because I mean, in my studies of reality and all these things, this word density does tend to come up, quite a good amount. So I've heard that there's different densities to reality. Is that something that would be so? So you're saying we're multidimensional, and I totally resonate with that. We exist on all the densities at once, and a lot of times we just don't have, or for whatever reason, traumas can kind of sever our connection with those maybe higher densities or different densities, and we might feel like we're only in the material, or we're only in the physical, when truly that part of us is just not recognized maybe. So what is it that, how exactly do plant medicines help facilitate that reconnection, I guess you could say? Because, you'd think, you just drink some tea or you eat this mushroom or something, and it's just a food. But it ends up having this very expansive effect on you, which, you tap into these things and maybe you weren't unaware, or that you weren't aware that they were there at all, right? So how is it that plants can do that, Because you'd think like it's just, a flower or something growing out of the ground. Then you eat it, and it totally changes how you see reality, and totally changes the things that you're experiencing on like this very deep level. I guess it's just sort of a mystery. Like how does that happen? I mean, hopefully maybe you have some answers for us.
Well, I'll say for sure it's like a mystery and borders miraculous. And
Yes.
I think there's something very different about this class of substances of plants as like entheogens and psychedelics versus other stimulants and things like that, like the coca plant creating like a cocaine. It's just like oftentimes people, after they have these really expansive experiences brought on by these animal and plant teachers, a lot of people refer to them as, there's a sense of it being realer than real.
Ooh.
Yeah, there's, even if you can't quite put your hand on it, there's a sense of the ineffable, and like whatever had just happened is deeply, deeply important. Even if you don't have cognitive understanding of it, there's a sense of, I connected to something in myself or out in the universe that has really deep spiritual significance. Yeah. And it seems when people enter these entheogenic states or altered states through like breath work or like truly like ecstatic dance, like not so much the Western version of it, which certainly can get into these expansive states, but if there's like the African tribe, the Kung, they have all night dances where they are dancing and dancing in like ecstatic rapture in the same way that the Sufis, the whirling dervishes, would spin and spin and spin and create these expansive states of awareness.
Wow.
And so there's this like opening up to ourselves when you lose some orientation to the 3D that allows us to open up to something larger. And so on a maybe brain level, there's a lot of language right now in like the scientific world around this idea of the default mode network, which is this series of structures in the brain that basically order your life events and your sense of self and your sense of navigating the world as you usually do. And so when a lot of people like to describe this as like the ego, or like the way that the ego is filtering reality. And so when your reality filter dampens, when that gets turned down a little bit, you can open up your perception to non-ordinary ways of processing information, which includes a lot of subtle energies.
Wow.
So yeah.
So the ego as a filter for reality is kind of what you're saying.
Well, I think it's hand in hand with the filtering process that happens. Yeah, maybe it's even a little bit of the ego could be a little bit of a result of the filtering.
I love that. That's such a good explanation for that. Like you were talking about, people having maybe childhood traumas or traumas, which a lot of times, I mean, I'm sure it's something that's thrown around. I'm sure all of us have had something like that, on the one hand, it's kind of like maybe the most painful thing you've ever been through. But on the other hand, it kind of structures your reality, going forward. Something that I've kind of like, I guess tapped into is that our ego is actually basically formed, like you were saying, it's like a defense formed around those traumatic processes that happened, right, in a way. And so the way we approach the world is almost like trying to defend from those things happening again, right? And in a sense, they become even more real for you. It almost becomes like your dharma, right, is the thing that, the wounded healer, like Chiron, that in astrology, there's the planet Chiron, which is like your wound, but it's also that part that you came to heal at the same time, right? So there's that, it's like a blessing and a curse kind of thing, right? But again, we walk through life not even looking into it, really, not even kind of being aware of it. And so then someone would maybe come to you and they would say, hey, like, I feel as though there's something I need to really resolve, or something that's blocking my growth, it's stunting me, right? Or maybe there's some energy that's trapped, but I can't quite like pinpoint it, right? So they would come to you and like, I guess you had mentioned there's 4 different plant medicines you work with?
Yeah, primarily. Some others in there too. But
some others in there too. Okay, so I guess that's interesting to me, is like, what are they, what each one does what? Like, what would you do a different one for a different type of intention, or how does that work? Like, what are the differences between those plant medicines?
Cool. Before I answer that, I want to go back to something you just said, which is when people find that there's these patterns in their lives happening again and again, and it's not always necessarily someone's coming with like a big trauma or that they want to resolve, or like they're like anxiety or something. Maybe they keep finding themselves in like a similar relationship pattern again and again. It's like, oh, this person keeps I'm always in these like unevenly powered relationships, or this person keeps like cheating on me and I go to a new partner and it's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
And so, and like you said, with the self-fulfilling prophecy,
right,
our psyche, at least there's a belief in like a lot of Western psychology that our psyche is like constantly recreating situations that we've been in. I think it's a Freudian idea. And so we're actually seeking out those relationships to create again because it's comfortable and safe. If this relationship reminds me of my father, I'm going to continue to create that again and again.
Because in a way you feel comfortable with it, but in another way you want to actually heal that. So it's like exposure therapy type thing, right?
Exactly, and it's accessing that what is really the relationship with my father. I'm finding other relationship with men in that similar way in order to try to heal that relationship with my dad.
Wow.
But because I'm bringing this dynamic in again, I'm like, oh, well, what can I do differently here, even if it's entirely unconscious?
Wow, that's deep, man. I feel like I'm healing my relationship with my father right now.
Yeah. Aren't we all?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
Yeah. So the plant medicines and animal teachers, they are used in a lot of different contexts. They don't necessarily have like a one-to-one, like, this is good for this is good for this. But there absolutely is discernment to be used, especially if a facilitator is picking from different medicines and someone, let's say, has heard about psychedelics, has done a little bit of research, and they're like, I'm just ready to experience whatever. I'm open to receiving whatever guidance or input. Sometimes having milder experiences to begin with can be more helpful. So rapé, the tobacco snuff, which has other plants mixed in with it, or sananga, the stinging eye drops, can be helpful because these are not psychedelic medicines. These, they can create visionary states, but it tends not to be the case. And so both of those are pretty uncomfortable. Having a bunch of powder blown up your nose, or having what feels like dozens of bees pouring into your eyes. But there's worth to this. Even in just sitting with having an uncomfortable feeling and being able to internally see what resources you have to meet that and to hold yourself in order to hold that feeling. And so let's say that can occur again with in a mushroom experience where someone is sitting in this intense discomfort for a while, and you're trying not to turn away from it, because oftentimes when there's something challenging coming up in one of these experiences, if we are turning away and trying to push it away, it just amplifies. Because with these entheogens, one idea of what these entheogens are doing is amplifying the subtle patterns in our being and allowing it to come up in a way that we can really reconcile with it. So like in that moment, it might feel like a really, really big experience with like the parts of yourself that are involved with that relationship with your father. But if you're able to then open up and be present with that and hold probably those kid parts that are feeling all of their big emotions in the presence of all of that, there is a greater opportunity to really meet that and help find the next step, opposed to, this is too much, I don't like this, I'm pushing away. And
Wow, that's intense. Yeah, I have experienced rapé before. I did do that one time. It was at a Vermont trip, and we had like a few family friends, and we kind of sat in a circle, and one of our family friends, he's into a lot of like shamanic things, and he had some rapé, and tried it out. And I remember it would just, they blew it into one nostril, like with a tube, right? And then into the other one. And then it just, I don't know how else to explain it, but it was just this like slap, like it was like a slap in the face, it was just like bam. And I'm just like awake, And after that, there was just this like clearing sensation. Like it just felt like I was like filled with light or something. Like everything just became clear. because my mind kind of, not slap, I guess you could say, it like just stopped thinking, and I guess for me it was quite pleasant, but I would imagine even something that's not as powerful like that, would that some people might have, like their panic mode might go off a little bit, right? Or they might start getting a little like tense or something like that, right? So yeah, I guess it's just interesting to me as a facilitator, of these things. But you've probably seen people have like adverse reactions to these plant medicines also. And in that moment, what do you do for, like, what would you do for them?
Yeah, this is something that definitely requires a lot of tuning in on the part of the facilitator. And yes, as every possible presentation of someone's nervous system, finding a way to try to defend or push away, it is possible, especially with like high intensity medicines like bufo or ayahuasca. People can get into incredibly dysregulated states. And so as a facilitator or anyone seeking an experience to be facilitated, it's really important that facilitator has a background in knowing how to work with folks with intense dysregulation. And so oftentimes there's a lot of trainings nowadays that are like trauma-informed approaches. And this is, I think, indispensable because it helps find regulating methods to calm folks down or have folks find like their own resources. And so what intervention looks like is really dependent on that person in that moment.
Correct. Yeah, makes sense. Definitely.
Yeah. So this can come up a lot of different ways. One might just be a sharing touch of, and sometimes this is also incredibly inappropriate depending on what the presentation and the trauma that's coming up, right? If it's boundary violations, touch might not be the way, especially if it's like a opposite gendered facilitator having any sort of touch and they're like deep in a boundary violation like process. Sometimes it is just like, I'm here with you, I see you, I got you, or helping like even like guide someone through a mindfulness session of like, feel the couch below you, hear the sound of my voice, you can hear the music right now.
Come back to the moment.
Yeah, coming back to the moment.
The present.
Yeah. And there's also other somatic-based intervention that I think is really good. So this can be a lot of like soothing self-touch of whether someone is like holding their hand, like wringing their hands, going from one hand position to the other, or just like doing some very light like rocking back and forth. This can be really helpful.
Yeah.
If someone's in the space for it too, to sit right next to someone, let's say we're both like facing the same direction and just share like a slight rocking motion. And this can really help something called co-regulation, because certainly a facilitator shouldn't just leave the room and let the person, like if they're like kind of uncomfortable with the presence, they shouldn't just leave because this person's in this activated state, but find a way to sync up the rhythm of both of your nervous systems, let's say both of your breaths, and then the facilitator can really skillfully, really gently invite just a little bit more slowing down and a little bit more spaciousness. And I think that this is important to allow the participant to largely be guiding the process and to listen to the wisdom of the participant's body and nervous system. And the facilitator also holding this energetic space and just bringing things down ever so slightly. And so it's important for the facilitator to have a really calm and clear rootedness into their own being, because if I'm freaking out because someone's having a tough time, they absolutely, like in that state, absolutely they're going to pick up on that, and it becomes a very unsafe feeling. But if I am comfortable holding that emotional charge that someone else is going through, even if they're in an incredibly dysregulated state, and they can feel a sturdy, calm presence that's not overbearing, but giving someone space and just really holding that energetic space, that can be that can make a huge impact.
Amazing. And I guess also I'm sure this is something that people could do on their own also, not even, maybe being in a session or, some sort of a healing thing, but even in like a day-to-day life, these things could help people, I'm sure, right? Just like you said, gently swaying. And So yeah, before we move on, just a few things I want to touch on. So my father, he smoked a lot of cigarettes, you know. So we're talking about father things, and cigarettes, I guess, are tobacco. Like that is what you're, I guess, trying to ingest, or like that is the active component of it. How is that different from rabe? I think it is, right? Rabe. How are those the same, and how are those different? And also, where's that like addictive element come from? You know, it's probably something within the person, right? I would imagine.
And at the same time, too, there is, you're right about being in the person and someone helping fill or soothe an emotional need in themselves, an unmet need through the habit of smoking or through the habit of anything.
Yes. Yeah.
But it is definitely true. The tobacco someone's receiving in a pack of 20 cigarettes is different from the tobacco someone might receive through rape or the shamanic mapacho, which is used in South America, which is a different strain of tobacco.
Wow.
It's a very powerful strain, and it oftentimes accompanies ayahuasca experiences or other.
I've heard of that too.
And other experiences, maybe not with ayahuasca at all, but mapacho is really a unadulterated version of tobacco. And also there are North American strains of tobacco that are kept by indigenous communities and folks in those practices that also is very different from what folks are finding in their cigarettes. So tobacco in cigarettes is laden with all these other chemicals, all these other things to make it addictive and taste good and all this.
Even American spirits?
I can't say. I haven't done my research. Of all of them, it seems like they're the best.
Right, okay.
Yeah, and I mean, an incredible thing, too, I've connected most with tobacco through Native American practices. And so a lot of teachers in those communities have been like, yeah, you know, if all you have is tobacco from a cigarette, just roll a little bit of that tobacco out onto your hand, and that you can pray with that. That is still the spirit of tobacco.
Yes.
That is still connecting you to that plant spirit, that plant teacher.
Wow.
And you can find healing and transformation and prayer through that.
Yeah, I've heard the tobacco is like it's like a spirit for the Native Americans, right? It's something it's almost like I've heard it be referred to as like a masculine kind of protecting deity, I guess. Why would that be? Why is it like a protector type of spirit? You know, and why is it masculine? Also,
yeah, this is a great question, and different tribes or communities do attribute different genders to these spirits, but generally with tobacco, for example, folks do refer to it as a masculine energy.
Wow.
And just like any plant spirit, I mean, these aren't necessarily literally gendered, but they are embodying ways of being that are maybe more specific or more commonly found in one gender, like a masculine way of being.
Okay.
So tobacco is often used as like a purgative. So I was talking to one teacher who felt like there are many ways to use tobacco, and really smoking is not the way to use tobacco.
Really?
Yeah. So you have the snuff. You have it just in your hand to pray with. There's also another way to use tobacco, which is like putting it into water and sort of distilling it down into this sludge almost, and then oftentimes they use a shell and pouring that into the nose. Or swallowing it, and this can help induce purging.
Wow.
So with some South American practices in particular, they'll do this in order to help bring on purge before other type of medicine work or other type of energy work. Yeah, so it's not so uncommon to be done in and around ayahuasca ceremonies, for example.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's very, very, very interesting. Just, you know, I just want to say I just really admire how much you know about all of this, and just your eloquence with your words. Like you're speaking like very, very well about this stuff. As I'm sure you know that is your expertise, so it makes sense. You know.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. No, it's really, really cool. Just to even know you, you know. And again, thank you so much for coming on. Like it's amazing. I have so many questions, so much to ask. Alcohol is a big no-no, I would imagine, in terms of like the healing, like plant medicines or something, or
right. Well, it's certainly alcohol is used very differently in our culture than it has been in past cultures. So there are a number of, let's say, these like mystery schools that would incorporate alcohol into their ceremonies, because what they're trying to do is bring about a altered state
Altered
of
state of
consciousness.
consciousness.
And so alcohol absolutely has its healing properties, but
Wow.
almost all the, I mean, very regularly it's not in healing contexts. So, I mean, a good example of this is you're able to have like a couple of drinks and really have like a heart to heart with your partner and be able to talk about things in a more regulated way that otherwise are more challenging to do so. Yeah. And so, one thing too that borders that shows a potential medicinal use or positive heart opening use of alcohol is people go to, or they drink at a party or another social event, and they feel less inhibited and they feel like their social anxiety isn't there and they can connect more freely to the people around them.
Like a
Yeah.
social lubricant, like as it's
Exactly,
called, right?
exactly. Yeah, I like that term a lot. And so there is like a positive there that's in more common use, but I do think it is a very different thing when alcohol is used in a ceremonial context. And this isn't a very popular thing. Generally, in like the plant medicine world, people tend to think of alcohol as like a lower vibrational substance that helps not go into self-exploration, but in fact helps fortify someone in maladaptive patterns. So you're more likely to show up into relationships in disingenuous or self-serving ways if you're continually engaging with the alcohol being, the alcohol spirit.
Right, the alcohol. Right?
Alcohol. No, I haven't.
Oh, okay. Apparently that's where it comes from. Yeah, that's like no, Arabic term, I think. So okay, so let's go down the line then. If we're this topic is kind of very interesting to me. So we talked about tobacco, we talked about alcohol. What about marijuana? Have you what can you say about that? Because I know that is kind of going up the scale a little bit in terms of the potency, like a spiritual kind of feeling of again like healing those things that prevent us from accessing our higher self, right? And I feel as though marijuana can be helpful with that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that marijuana and cannabis is the first experience a lot of people have in Western culture of an altered state that is not alcohol, is not the depressive experience of alcohol, but starts to expand someone's perceptions and make someone's sensory perceptions and also thought patterns happening and occurring in like different ways.
Right.
And so especially people's first experiences smoking marijuana is they are quite psychedelic. I mean, people are tuning into their senses, whether it's taste or being able to be without anxiety and finding things incredibly funny, and just having a sort of joy and restfulness in their own being that usually they haven't experienced until then. And I do think marijuana is the first, sometimes usually quasi psychedelic, but sometimes full psychedelic experience someone has. So especially with like taking edibles and especially high dose edibles, it becomes a very different experience than smoking a joint.
So moving on, then we have, so what would you say about like LSD, for example? Because I know that's a man-made chemical, right? But isn't it also found in nature or something?
So there's outside of the Temple of Ulysses, which is where in the Greek culture they're having these massive ceremonies.
Right now?
No.
They used to.
Way back when.
Okay.
Like Socrates and Plato and folks of that, like Pythagoras, were folks who were experiencing this. Yeah, and from my understanding, once a year there'd be these mass ceremonies of this unknown substance, soma, that would be ingested. And for a long time, folks were like, we don't know what this was.
I've heard about this.
Yeah, but outside of the Temple of Ulysses were all of these, I believe, wheat fields. And wheat can grow ergot. And ergot is this type of mold that contains something that's very, very close to LSD.
Got it.
Yeah.
LSA, right, or something like that.
This could be, yeah.
Could be.
Yeah.
back then, or at least in the ancient times, there was this sacredness, that they held these substances, maybe you could say, these experiences, where it was a sacred thing. And of course, for sure, when you, for example, take mushrooms, or you go into these states, it's so different from your normal mundane everyday like kind of life, and it opens up these things that sometimes just one is all you need. Just sometimes one experience like that can unlock a lifetime of things for you. I know I haven't done psychedelics in a while, just because I'm still working through what happened, those experiences. So then I guess let's move on to magic mushrooms, as they're called.
Sure. Yeah.
That's something you work with also.
Yeah. So mushrooms, or los niños, like the children.
The children.
Yeah. Is it's incredible that how common it is for folks to have mushroom experiences, because in the 60s and 70s, mushrooms weren't around so much. Even though a lot of people think of the mushrooms as something being a part of that, it really was mescaline and LSD. And mushrooms didn't become popular until a little time later.
Terrence McKenna really helped with that, right? Because I know him and his brother, they wrote the Magic Mushrooms Guide, and they did it under a pseudonym, and then they came out later, and then they were like, oh, we wrote that. Right?
Yeah. Right, and they told folks how to grow it. And what I love about mushrooms is we are at a juncture right now where you have a lot of pharmaceutical interest in the psychedelic world, and mushrooms, I think, really help liberate people from a medicalized model, because anyone for $200 or less can grow mushrooms in their own home and have essentially an endless supply of medicine, whether you're microdosing it or taking full journeys.
Wow.
And I think this is really the antithesis to what this medicalized push. And so it's just incredible that folks, so for so long, folks have been eating mushrooms. Terrence McKenna put forth, well, he drew from other sources, but he put forth the stone ape theory, that our ancestors were eating mushrooms along the way. This allowed us to have larger, expansive experiences, and perhaps phenomena like language and symbols started to come through that way and open us up to existential reasoning. Yeah, because the human brain at some point, the frontal lobe just exploded in size over like a relatively short period.
That's right.
Like maybe a few tens of thousands of years.
And we still don't know what exactly caused that or how that happened. I mean, but that's going based off of Charles Darwin, right, off of his theory of evolution, that we evolved from these lower, I guess, quote unquote, lower like apes and stuff like that, which is just one of the theories. So there's things saying that might not be exactly how it is. But yeah, I think I've talked about this, I'm pretty sure, even on my podcast earlier, where at one point we had a very rudimentary way of tribal communication, where we only talked through like emotions, like very early on, and like someone would feel joy, and then that would spread to others, and then everyone in the tribe would feel joy. Or if there was an enemy, everyone would know it through the emotion, that, and it would kind of spread. We still are very regulated by these types of things. Emotions are contagious. So leaders will create emotions. They will create emotions that will spread to others, But then something happened, and I think Terrence McKenna talks about how suddenly we had this new gene in our brain, in our DNA, which he refers to as the language gene, which basically, created like the neocortex, the third layer of the brain, in the Treant brain model, where now all of a sudden we're making art, and we're talking, and we're creating these mouth noises, I think he says, right? And we're writing our history, and we're creating stories, and we're passing on these wisdoms to the newer generations. And there's religion is born, and like spirituality, and this like connection to like a higher source, so to speak. through language in a way, where we can encode these experiences into stories and pass them on, and even live from them, like theater and stuff like that is born, and music even. And so, yeah, so that's interesting. So Terence McKenna says that, his theory, the stoned ape theory, is that that apes found these mushrooms, started taking them, and that expanded their neocortex, right, in a relatively short period of time, right? Because according to history, 5,000 years ago was like the first inklings of language, was it? Do you know anything about that? Like the history of...
I would imagine language goes back quite a further ways than that. I mean, if we think about oral traditions, I know the Aborigine, for example, in Australia have depictions of like an astronomical event, like a big astronomical event that people could have seen from the Earth, and this is like 30,000 years ago.
Wow.
And of course, there are a lot of different theories about the timeline of how old humanity is. So someone like Graham Hancock, for example, has a lot of content around possibly there being advanced civilizations that have, for one reason or another, collapsed, and there's been many waves of humanity and these sort of peaks of consciousness, and then going back into lower vibrational states and lower vibrational societal structures and there's a lot of like history forgetting during that period.
Makes sense.
And a lot of it is based on different archaeological findings, like understanding of migrations from one continent to another, and there being questioning about that, and it becomes certainly murky territory.
Right. But from my understanding, I don't think it's too far-fetched to say that we've had language, at least, or a civilized society for much longer than our recorded history says. I think that it could have easily been millions or billions of years that there have been I guess you could say intelligent beings in the universe. We just don't know. We just maybe lost the records, But I think it's safe to say we are on an upswing right now, right? I think it's safe to say, hopefully.
Yeah. We'll see. And that's one reason why I think these entheogens really help, because it helps open folks up to being humbled, I think, and realizing that we're part of something bigger. Realizing that the other life on this earth is also incredibly sentient and incredibly intelligent.
Yes.
And that there's a lot to learn from the way that animals do so. And that there's ways of communicating that far surpasses the efficacy of technology that we have.
Yeah, definitely. Our DNA holds the record, so maybe the history isn't written down, but there's a way to access our whole history from the very beginning of our conception, I guess you could say.
Absolutely. And there's so much folks don't understand about DNA. So I think it's something like when DNA was kind of first discovered and scientists were working with it for like the first few decades, they're like, all of this helps with like expression of genes, of genes and things, and the rest of this, like 95%, is like junk DNA.
Junk DNA.
It's there for no reason apparently.
But ridiculous.
Yes.
They just don't know what it is. It's just kind of floating, like not attached yet, right? But again, there's a theory. What I've come to understand is that we have to rebuild our genetic code. That we kind of, that is like the fall of man, as it's talked about in many mythologies, that we kind of fell into the material, and that junk DNA, it's been disrupted, but all those pieces that it can't just be for nothing. That it's just floating around in there. We have to now consciously rebuild our DNA to get back to those states. That's kind of like something I picked up. But
And I think a great thing to keep in mind as well is that this might just be data, all this junk DNA, that just doesn't fit the model and understanding that our current scope of scientific understanding has. And going back to this idea that we are multidimensional beings, there can be a lot that's manifesting and acting on levels that we can't see or perceive 100%. On this level of reality.
Totally. Like you were saying, I loved how you said the word filter. Our ego is a filter. for reality. If we were to reconnect those strands, those chromosomes, and rebuild our DNA as it's supposed to be, if we had a template for it, which is within us, we do have that template deep down buried, it's still there. We would see levels of reality that we just can't right now. We just don't have the proper filter. It's not all connected into one integrated, multidimensional whole. And I mean, from what I understand, psychedelics, sometimes, in the right intention and things like that, they help you to see into those other densities of reality, and what is it called? Yeah, so I think that we're slowly on our way there, but I think there's a lot of progress being made right now with humanity. I think we're rising up, we're getting back to those states,
And I think one thing that's expressed more recently is this sense of epigenetics.
Epigenetics,
and this
yes.
has to me such a clear correlation to what traditional and indigenous wisdom says about ancestors, which is there's patterns that are passed down from generation to generation that manifest in our own being.
Yes,
and
yes, totally.
we as just a person in this lifetime, our DNA changes, and the things that we do, the places that we are, the patterns of being that we have, whether we're living a very stressful life or a very free and uninhibited life, this changes our DNA expression. And so there's a sense that what we do now affects our DNA, and that has consequence for these expressions down the line. And also, taking from some indigenous perspective as well, we are able to take those unhealed patterns given to us by ancestors and in fact change and heal those, and that has an effect backwards in time, that our ancestors are able to live through us and come to find their own resolution through the work that's done through us, not just by us, but also through our healed and intelligent ancestors moving through and liberating us from ancestral curses. Yeah.
Because all is one, really, and time is an illusion. We are our ancestors, we're kind of the living embodiment of everything that came before and everything that's going to come forward. And this can only be done in the moment. But yes, epigenetics, I've definitely heard Huberman throw that term around. Andrew Huberman, maybe?
It rings a bell. I'm not calling it up right now, though.
Okay, that's okay. Yeah, he has a really good podcast where he basically elucidates like all of the scientific studies being done right now. It's a really good one. So gene expression, epigenetics, like a simple way to think about that, like when I was in California, there was so much more sun,
Sure.
and it literally changed the color of my hair, you know what I mean? Or like my skin was like, more tan, you could say, right? So we have these latent genes in us that you need to kind of put yourself in the right atmosphere, in the right place. You need to, put that intention down, and depending on the things you do, those genes will start expressing themselves. And so for me, I'm gonna go into this, especially on my podcast, but like art is the way to do it. Art is literally that place where you learn to express those genes in novel ways that maybe you haven't before. Like art is the way to rebuild our DNA, I think, and get back to that state. And just to touch back on what we were talking about before, how according to the theory of the stoned ape and how we got that language gene, after that, there was this big, I guess like a big bang or something, like a big explosion of culture itself, and these things, the arts, the sciences, religion, they were all one thing. They were all united. And I know I've seen Aboriginal tribes. I saw a documentary, I forgot who it was. It might have been the Dogon tribe or something. There's Aboriginal tribes living right now on this planet, that are completely cut off from the modern world, so to speak. And what they do is, this isn't exactly, but the way I envision it is like, maybe on the weekends or every, full moon or something, they all get together and they enact their creation story. So basically, it's a molding of, and using plant medicines also, like the shamans, which is like a very interesting topic to me too. I'm sure you could speak on that. They would basically have this theater where they would enact their understanding of how creation came to be, and so that would mold theater and music and like acting, and like directing and storytelling, and just the same like science, because if you know where you came from, you know why things are the way they are, then you can explain anything. It's always been like such a central thing as like the creation stories in ancient tribes, like where we came from. And I think people right now are kind of lacking that. Like we don't know our origins, we don't have this one concrete story telling us where we came from, where we're going. I feel as though a lot of people are lost right now,
Absolutely. There's a huge lack of mythology that people are passionate about in our culture right now. So mostly that myth that we have, that worldview is a materialistic one, that we are born and will die into nothingness.
Yes. That's terrible. Terrible. The separation, that we're fragmented, and just like all our different like topics like science, art, religion, they're kind of their own thing, but we need to reconnect them again. I think we need to get them together.
Absolutely, yeah. With all these, when we're living so moment to moment as a culture, and if we don't have a sense that our consciousness continues or that we're a part of something larger, I think it creates a really dangerous precedent for our culture to be acting. Because if we're looking at climate crisis in the world and we're looking at stewardship of the earth, there's not terribly much to get out of that on like the individual reward basis, if that's the way that we're thinking and addressing these things, which is like, we are going to really have a good ride this life and set up okay for our kids, but for folks to become so disconnected from a deep tradition and disconnected from figures that are inspiring to them. Mostly this is perhaps in the form of archetypes of like celebrities and things, and certainly there are archetypes that are alive now that are strong and changing, but there's not a lot that is truly, I think, inspiring to the masses in Western civilization.
Right.
And there's a sense of being divorced from the natural world and not knowing where we're going, being divorced from thinking that there is believing and feeling in our own being that we are part of this incredible web of life, and how important it is to move in a way that honors that.
Yes, totally.
Hey, you made it to the end. You get a gold star. Seriously, thank you so much. You are supporting what I am doing here just by listening, and I appreciate that a whole lot. Ever since I can remember, and it feels like forever, I have been fascinated with what all this is. Being, life, and the nature of reality in general. It is now my hope to traverse these different facets and expand consciousness together with you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for being here. If you find that you enjoy listening, please subscribe, leave a 5-star review, and/or comment, as it shows the algorithm what I'm doing here is truly worthwhile and helps me reach more people. And if for any reason you wish to reach out, I am on Instagram at Dimitri Make Love. That's DimitryMakelove. Have an amazing day. Remember, all is one. IO. And until next time.